Race medicine is bad medicine, poor science, and a false interpretation of humanity. This is a quote from Dorothy Roberts, who is a social justice advocate and a law scholar, as she tries to answer the problem with race-based medicine in her TED Talk. She starts out her talk with her experience of a research study in which she participated in that had asked for her race and what she identified in. She first found an issue with this, as she was not sure how to answer because she had a white dad and a black mom. She got to thinking how this was applicable to the research study about how she identified herself as a person. This prompted more thinking about how race is used elsewhere in medicine and how it is used incorrectly. She goes on to express examples such as physician's diagnosis, measurements, treatments, prescriptions, and disease definitions. She said some of these measurements and definitions comes from lawmakers rather than doctors, as they were done in the mid-19th and 20th centuries as a way to keep the racial purity alive. Some of these measurements, based from race, are from the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. The GFR is an important kidney indicator that is used on race as an important factor in factoring the GFR. The GFR is used as a race measurement because it is assumed that black African Americans have more muscle mass than whites. However, a petite black African American would not have more muscle mass than a white bodybuilder. Another measurement is the lung capacity that's measured by a spirometer. A spirometer was a diagnostic tool developed during racist times in the Deep South to measure the low lung capacity of blacks. The spirometer was used to promote slavery and saying that the blacks needed slavery in order to produce the blood flow required to the brain in order for them to be good citizens. It says whenever the blacks did not have slavery and have work to increase the blood flow to their brain, that they would become arrogant and aggressive. Some of those tools are still in use today and still actually have a race indicator that a doctor or nurse can use. She then goes on to describe some of the lack of treatment and drugs that are based off of race. She talks about how it's less likely for an African American to receive pain medication than a white American, and how the FDA even approved a drug called Bidil to treat black patients. Now, the drug did not go successfully, as the campaigning for it and advertisement was rejected by black African Americans, as they worried, why would we be taking a pill only for blacks? And it was not received well across the scientific community. She then goes on to talk about how race is used as a proxy to assume for a lot of patients' conditions, as the doctors don't have time or resources to take all the different tests required. Now, this is an issue because the race is not a proportional measurement with some of these conditions that a person may have. Rather, these conditions are individualized based on circumstance of what the person's made life choices be, or some of their circumstances that they're living in. Some of these circumstances that they're living in, such as social issues, are actually the biggest cause of some of these differences in the health problems that you see across races, rather than being the genetic variation. As we've seen in our past, that there is no genetic variation, or very little. So the research and the money going into some of these scientific notations, trying to explain the race-based differences and see the differences between a black African American or a white American, to see why the differences of health conditions exist, could actually be going into the fix of social issues that are really at the root cause of it. We have read 3 examples from our readings or that I picked out that go into more race-based medicine and how it is a problem. The 2 articles I picked out were birth outcomes for Arabic named women before and after 9/11, and racial categories in medical practice and how useful are they. In the first article, birth outcomes for Arabic named women before and after 9/11, author Diane Lauderdale goes into how birth affects outcomes of African American women experiencing oppression. She says that women who reported racist experience, work-related stress, and uneducated blacks all experience lower birth weights than other races. She says that uneducated was based off of the fact that some of these women were not able to express and realize the situations of the racist situations going on around them, and rather thought it was on their fault or that something they had to deal with, causing more stress, leading to the lower birth weight. I also went to the article and found another example and about birth outcomes for Arabic named women before and after 9/11. Lauderdale discusses the studies measured and the effects of maternal stress or of anxiety on birth outcomes of Arabic women pre-9/11 and post-9/11. Pre-9/11 measurements were fairly similar with other races across the board as it comes to their children. And then post 9/11, she says because of the stress that it was experienced by a lot of Arabic women, that you saw a drastic drop in change in the birth weight outcome. The third article I looked into was the racial categories in medical practice and how useful are they. The author was headlined by Lottie Braun and paired with a multitude of other authors. They go on to discuss that in the mid-19th and 20th centuries was the height of the U.S. anxiety about miscegenation. They wanted to discuss how there was categories used, such as mulatto, to help influence racial purity. And they bolstered scientific ideas about race and data collected and how mulattoes would eventually die out. All these are three examples how race medicine has affected in our society and how they have helped prescribe the wrong idea that because of someone is of a certain race, that they will have these certain medical conditions. In conclusion, racial science is a bad science and has been deep embedded in the scientific community, and since the 19th and 20th century has been a part of American culture. Hopefully, with new biomedical research into genes and different developments, the research can slowly change narrative and make science into more strictly science rather than race-based.